Hey Optimancers, Chris here. So, I've decided to cover Playtest 7 a bit out of order because I figured my first deep dive really should be with the Warlock. So easily, and I mean really easily, the Warlock had much bigger changes compared to its Playtest 5 version than any of the other classes in this playtest. Not even close. And the Playtest 5 Warlock was really divisive, or as Jeremy Crawford would say, had a mixed response from the community. I playtested it personally multiple times, and overall, I enjoyed it. But I will say it felt and played very different than any other spellcaster I've ever played before. And these kinds of dramatic changes are always going to get some resistance because players look at it and it doesn't even kind of resemble the Warlock they're used to. I mean, you looked at the Playtest 5 Warlock's class chart and you could be forgiven for assuming that the Warlock had been changed to no more of a spellcaster than a ranger, and nobody wanted that. Anyways, it's clear that the satisfaction scores for the Playtest 5 Warlock were poor enough that they figured it wasn't salvageable. So the Playtest 7 Warlock looks a lot more like the Warlock we're used to. But that's not to say it still didn't get some pretty big revisions from the Player's Handbook Warlock, but we're talking revisions rather than bottoms up redesign. So, for the most part, as we go through the Playtest 7 Warlock, I'll be focusing more on changes to the Player's Handbook Warlock than the Playtest 5 Warlock. So, from the class chart, we should notice a couple changes. We get an invocation right from level 1, and eventually we're going to get 10. Previously, we started with 2 at level 2, and we finished up with 8. Because pack boons are now invocations, this really isn't going to feel like more invocations until level 5, where invocations kind of jump dramatically from 3 to 5 all of a sudden. I'm going to mention the Playtest 5 Warlock just to say it gave Warlocks medium armor proficiency, and that has been removed. Once again, Warlocks are going to start with light armor proficiency. And obviously, there is an error right here with the multiclassing rules. Playtest 5 allowed for selecting any of the mental ability scores as the Warlock's primary ability score. That's gone, but they didn't update the multiclassing text. So expect this to return to Charisma 13 as the prerequisite. And I think that's certain enough that even if you're playing with this playtest, it's safe to assume that's how it works. So let's start at level 1 with Eldritch Invocations. So there's a couple of pretty major changes here you should be aware of. Obviously, the first is we're selecting an invocation right from level 1 rather than level 2. And pack wounds are no longer separate features. You're going to select them as invocations if you want to. In fact, Pact of the Blade and Tome are suggested here as possible options at level 1. However, they're not mandatory, nor are they exclusive. This means you can play a Warlock without any packs if you like. You can also select multiple packs if you like once you have the invocations to do so. Personally, I'd be inclined to take Agonizing Blast at level 1. I'm actually a big fan of this. You can customize your Warlock build like never before this way. Pack boons are now optional. You can take them all if you like. I mean, right from level 2. Or you can take none of them if you like. It looks very possible to me to make a perfectly good Warlock now without a pack boon at all. This wording includes a restriction that you can't select the same invocation more than once unless its description says otherwise. And currently that's just one invocation, Lessons of the First Ones. All other invocations may be selected only once. Now, you might be thinking, what invocation would I ever want to take more than once? Well, maybe none of them from the 2014 Player's Handbook, but there are definitely some here where I can see why you might consider taking them multiple times if it were allowed. Finally, you used to be able to switch an invocation selection when you gained a level in Warlock, and that is gone. Not sure how I feel about that. I think I need to play around with building up Warlocks from level 1 and see how restricting it feels, because with the 2014 Warlock, I tend to switch out my invocations pretty regularly. But this means that once you select an invocation, you'll keep that invocation for the rest of your career. Now, I've heard some online speculation that maybe this was an oversight, and that could be true. But at least for now, that's how it works. And if you don't like it, you should let them know in the survey, whether it's intentional or not. I'm going to go over all the invocations one by one, but I'll save that until after we've gone over the base Warlock features. So we'll move on to Pack Magic, and here are the changes you should expect from the player's handbook. The Tasha's option of changing a cantrip selection when you gain a Warlock level has been included here, and that is great. I pretty much like all the Tasha's optional class features. As far as I'm concerned, they could just throw them all into the base classes, and I'd be totally fine with that. The Warlock spell list is back, but they've added Bane, Detect Magic, and Speak with Animals. I never really thought about it before, but now that I see it, Bane seems like it obviously should be a Warlock spell. What you know as spells known are now called prepared spells, but that doesn't really mean anything. The number of spells you know hasn't been changed, and at least it hasn't been changed on the class chart, as your Warlock actually is going to know a lot more spells than the 2014 Warlocks because there are features that add them, but mainly you're going to get a ton through your subclass. As before, you can switch out one spell when you gain a level. Finally, Warlocks weren't ritual casters in the player's handbook. Now, any character who has a spell with the ritual tag is able to cast it ritually. So when spells like Detect Magic get added to the Warlock spell list, that becomes a spell that a Warlock might actually want to take. So moving on to level 2, we get Magical Cunning. This is a brand new feature, so if all your pack slots are expended, you can perform a 1-minute rite that allows you to regain half of those slots, rounded up, once per long rest. So for any Warlock of 10th level or lower, you'll recover 1 pack slot per long rest. So as we go through the other classes in this playtest, we'll see this kind of feature popping up a lot, where you recover uses of class features, but only if you're completely out of uses. In principle, I don't like that restriction. Though I have played with pack magic enough that I know that running out of spells when you're using pack magic is pretty much a given, so that restriction bothers me less in this case. I should also note that if you have a spell going with greater than a 1-minute duration, like say you summon something, you could use this rite well within the spell's duration. But what this is going to be is essentially you'll get 1 more pack slot per day, but still only 2 spell slots for any given combat. I mean, until high levels. We also get 2 more invocations at 2nd level, so if you like, a pack boon and 2 more invocations, like Agonizing and Repelling Blast. Moving on to level 3, we're going to get our Warlock subclass, formerly gained at level 1. The Player's Handbook Warlock gets their Pact at this level instead. Of course, with this Warlock, if we want, we can grab a Pact at level 1, or not at all. Also, Pact slots just scale to 2nd level spells. Moving on to level 4, we get an ability score increase. Then level 5, there's no additional feature listed here, but it is just notable that you gain 2 invocations at level 5, and of course, your pack slots scale to 3rd level, so really there's lots of features here, just not listed on the chart. Then level 6, we're going to get a subclass feature. Then level 7, there's no additional feature listed, but we get another invocation, and our pack slots scale to 4th level. Then at level 8, we're going to get an ability score increase. Then at level 9, we're going to get Contact Patron. This automatically prepares Contact the Other Plane. We saw this in Playtest 5, by the way. It allows you to cast a spell to contact your patron without expending a spell slot, in which case you automatically pass your saving throw, and this is usable once per long rest. So if we look at Contact Other Plane, so there's a saving throw which our Warlock doesn't have to make, but if a wizard casts this, they have to make an intelligence saving throw, or they take psychic damage and lose the ability to take actions or communicate until they get a greater restoration spell. So automatically making that saving throw is a big deal. So I am casting this precisely once per long rest with my Warlock. And when you do, you get to ask your patron 5 questions which get 1-word answers. So it's pretty handy. And thematically, I actually really like this. In the 2014 Player's Handbook, your patron, it really is irrelevant unless your DM decides to make it relevant. But now it's just codified that you actually regularly communicate with your patron and they're helping you. I think this is a cool feature. But also, pack slots are now 5th level and we get another invocation, so there's a few other things at level 9. Then at level 10, we get a subclass feature. This, by the way, is the level I hate the most playing a Warlock, because those 2 pack slots goes so fast, and other spellcasters have so many spells at level 10. So they're casting leveled spells round after round after round, and we're out right away. But things change at level 11. That's when we get Mystic Arcanum. Now, the player's handbook does not allow Mystic Arcanum to be changed. However, the playtest version incorporates the Tasha's optional class feature, allowing you to change Mystic Arcanum selections when you gain a level. And you already know I'm going to give that a thumbs up. And in my experience, when you're playing with pack magic, level 11 is very dramatic for the Warlock. That third pack slot is a dramatic increase. I mean, 150% in one level. And then you're adding that on top of your Mystic Arcanum spell. So it is a dramatic boost in number of spells you can cast. I mean, in theory, at level 10, a Warlock just can't cast more than 2 spells in a single combat. And now you could cast 4. Level 12, we're going to get an ability score increase, and you're going to get another invocation. At level 13, you're going to get your 7th level Mystic Arcanum. And at level 14, you're going to get a subclass feature. Level 15, Mystic Arcanum for 8th level and another invocation selection. Level 16, an ability score improvement. Level 17 is another dramatic shift in spellcasting potential. A 4th pack slot is added, and 9th level Mystic Arcanum, so all those powerful 9th level spells. Level 18, there is no feature. This is almost a dead level. You're going to get 1 invocation, and I have to think at this point you probably have all the invocations you really want, so I don't imagine level 18 is going to feel all that special. Level 19, we're going to get an ability score increase. And of course, keep in mind that with ability score increase in the playtest, at level 19, you can increase your charisma to 22, which is, I imagine, what you would do. And then level 20, we're going to get our capstone, Eldritch Master. So the player's handbook allows the Warlock to regain all their pack slots in 1 minute once per long rest. And technically, the playtest version does the same thing, but this is a replacement for Magical Cunning, or it upgrades it if you prefer. And it's fine. I don't love it, but it's okay. And now let's go over the invocations. The first thing I should mention is that there's a number of invocations from the player's handbook that are just gone. The design notes explain their absence, as most of them applied effects that can be duplicated with rituals, which Warlocks can now use. And honestly, there is nothing not included here that I figure you're likely to miss. Certainly nothing I'm going to miss. Also, any invocation that has no level requirement is now available right from level 1. Rather than present these alphabetically, I'm going to start with the invocations available at level 1, and then I'll progress by the level they're available. So, starting with our level 1 available invocations, we begin with Agonizing Blast. This requires at least 1 Warlock cantrip. Now, you might be thinking that prerequisite doesn't do anything, since of course you're going to have Warlock cantrips. And you'd be mostly right, but there is one thing I can think of that this does. It means if you want Agonizing Blast, you can't get it as a non-Warlock using Eldritch Adept, because this feat requires the invocation you select to have no prerequisite if you aren't a Warlock. Well, technically it has a prerequisite. This used to add your Charisma modifier to Eldritch Blast damage rolls. Now it allows you to choose a Warlock cantrip you know, and it adds your Charisma modifier to that damage. So you could add it to the damage rolls of a Booming Blade cantrip, if you want, for example. I mean, by level 5, it'd be hard not to select Eldritch Blast anyways, because you're applying the bonus to each beam, instead of just once. But right away, we see it. The restriction on taking any invocation only once, we might feel that here, because without that restriction, I might consider taking Agonizing Blast more than once for some builds if I wanted to concentrate on multiple cantrips. Not able to do that. Moving on, Armor of Shadows allows you to cast Mage Armor on yourself at will. The only change is that it no longer removes the material component, which, if you have an Arcane Focus or Component Pouch, shouldn't matter. The biggest change for this invocation isn't for Warlocks at all. Armor of Shadows was often, maybe even normally, selected by Wizard Abjurers to fuel their Arcane Ward. But Arcane Ward got changed so it only refuels if you're expending spell slots, so that trick doesn't work anymore. Then we have Devil's Sight. allows you to see normally in dim light and darkness, both magical and non-magical, up to 120 feet. The old version had this weird interaction where you saw normally in darkness, but dim light, for some reason, still impeded your perception rolls. I'm glad to see this taken care of. I mean, it wasn't a big deal, but it was just weird. Then Eldritch Mind. So this gives you advantage on Constitution saving throws to concentrate on a spell. And if you think about feats, you probably think about Warcaster and how it gives you advantage on concentration saving throws. The difference is that when you have Warcaster, it only gives you advantage on concentration saving throws as a result of damage. So if you are making a saving throw, say due to a Sleet Storm, for example, Eldritch Mind will give you advantage and Warcaster won't. However, most of the time you make concentration saving throws, it is due to damage. However, Warcaster is a feat. So if I'm a Warlock, Eldritch Mind as an invocation is probably less of an investment than a full feat. So there's good reason why a Warlock might want to take this. I was asked by someone if there was any good reason why you might want to take Eldritch Adept to get Eldritch Mind instead of taking Warcaster. And like I said, there are some concentration saving throws that Eldritch Mind will give you advantage for that Warcaster won't. So there's some advantage to Eldritch Mind, but I would say overall, Warcaster is usually the better selection. On to Eldritch Spear. Requires at least one Warlock cantrip. You choose one Warlock cantrip you know that deals damage and has a range of at least 10 feet. When you cast this spell, its range increases by a number of feet equal to 30 times your Warlock level. You can change your cantrip selection when you gain a level. So this used to just change your Eldritch Blast range to 300 feet. If you select Eldritch Blast now, you would reach 300 feet by 6th level, and then you would surpass that at higher levels. Of course, Eldritch Blast already has a good range to begin with. Where this might be more interesting is if you applied it to a spell that doesn't have a good range, like maybe Mind Sliver. I've never really prioritized this invocation, and honestly, I probably still won't. Fiendish Vigor allows you to cast False Life at will, and to automatically get the maximum amount in temps, which is 8 temporary hit points. The old version didn't automatically give you the highest result, which didn't make a difference outside of combat, because, the idea was you could just recast it until you got the highest result. But in combat, it could make a difference. It's also, just a quality of life thing, preventing the constant re-rolling. This is one of those invocations that sometimes I took at a lower level when those temporary hit points are more dramatic, and then I'd switch it out at higher levels, so the removal of that option would have me thinking carefully before grabbing this now. If they return the ability to change out invocations, I do think this is a solid pick at lower levels. Mask of Many Faces is disguise self at will, and it is the same as it's always been. And I like this invocation. It is not for every build, but when I do take it, I tend to use it fairly often. Misty Visions is Silent Image at will. The only difference is it doesn't remove the material component, which is fine. Again, this is an invocation I don't take on every build, but sometimes I take it. Now, there's one case where this is similar to Armor of Shadows and how they had kind of that trick for Abjurers, and that trick has now been removed. Well, there was a trick for 14th level illusionists to take this, and then they could cast Silent Image and make it real, and it wouldn't require any spell slots, so they could just do it an infinite amount of times. And once again, the redesign of the wizard has prevented that trick from working. So this is still a good invocation, but that little trick no longer exists. Pact of the Blade. So obviously, change number 1 is it's an invocation. You use a bonus action to conjure a pact weapon, which is any simple or martial melee weapon of your choice. Or you can bond any magic weapon you touch. So right away, and this is the case with the 2014 Pact of the Blade 2, you can't create a ranged weapon with this, but you can bond a ranged weapon. It just needs to be a magical ranged weapon. You automatically gain proficiency in the weapon, you can use its mastery property, and you can use it as a spellcasting focus. When you attack with the weapon, you can use your charisma modifier for attack and damage rolls, and you can choose for it to deliver its normal damage, or necrotic, or psychic, or radiant damage. Your bond ends if you used a feature again, or if the weapon is more than 5 feet away from you for a minute or more, or you die. When the bond ends, the conjured weapon disappears. So, the buffs over Pact of the Blade in the player's handbook are numerous. It's a bonus action instead of an action. Bonding a magic weapon doesn't take an hour. You can bond an artifact or a sentient weapon. You can use it as a spellcasting focus. You can use your charisma modifier, and you can change the damage type. So, it's gotten a massive buff. There's only one nerf. If you bond a magic weapon, you can no longer dismiss it to an extra dimensional space. Not a big deal. I was originally planning to include damage calculations for the Pact of the Blade and related invocations in this video, but this video is going to be long enough, so I did those calculations in a separate video, which I'm going to link in the video description, but here's the summary. The damage for weapon using warlocks, both ranged, but especially melee, come in far too high. But I should mention that's not necessarily because of Pact of the Blade on its own, it's because of Pact of the Blade plus Life Drinker, plus Thirsting Blade. You put those three together, and then it's too good. So, obviously, some rebalancing needs to occur. I'm not sure the rebalancing needs to happen here. It maybe is Life Drinker, it's maybe Thirsting Blade. In fact, it's almost certainly Thirsting Blade. That's probably the biggest offender. So, there will need to be rebalancing within these three invocations. But it's a good invocation. My main issue with it is maybe that because it's now a first level invocation, it's available through the Eldritch Adept feat, this kind of becomes a really good option for any weapon user. Even if you aren't using Charisma, there's enough benefits here that this might be something you would want as well. So, it still maybe needs some tweaking. Pact of the Tome. So you create a Book of Shadows after a short or long rest. If you already have the Book of Shadows when you do this, the old one disappears. And it should add here that whatever spell slot was created by that Book of Shadows disappears as well, because that's an issue. But it says when the book appears, you choose 3 cantrips and 2 first level spells with the ritual tag. Each of these spells can be from any class's spell list and must already not be prepared by you. Why you would take a cantrip you've already prepared, I have no idea, but you're not allowed to. Well, you have the book. They become prepared warlock spells for you. You get a first level spell slot, and once you expend it, you can't gain another slot from this feature until you finish a long rest. And you can use the book as a spellcasting focus. So again, this is a huge buff from the Player's Handbook Pact. With the old version, you pick 3 cantrips that became warlock spells for you, and that's it. And those 3 cantrips you have forever. So now you can switch out the cantrips, you get the 2 ritual spells, and you can switch those out as well. So with a short rest, you can access any first level ritual spell. You get the spell slot, and you can use the book as a focus. As a warlock, getting a first level spell slot is significant, because if you have any first level spells prepared, you might not want to expand pack slots that have scaled in level in order to cast them. Now the loop that I'm sure wasn't intended, but this is the way it's worded, you call forth your Book of Shadows and you get all this stuff, but if you take a rest and call forth another book, it doesn't say that the first level slot from the previous book gave you goes away if you didn't expend it. And I am sure that's not intentional. I expect it will be fixed, but they need to spell it out. And I suggested earlier how that could be done. Otherwise, I really like this. There are a lot of first level rituals, and theoretically being able to access any of them is pretty good. And that first level slot is going to be useful. And being able to switch out your cantrips, I like that as well. Repelling Blast requires the Eldritch Blast cantrip. When you hit a large or smaller creature with an Eldritch Blast, you can push the creature 10 feet away from you. So the change from the Player's Handbook is the size restriction, and honestly, it makes sense. And this is still really good. And those are all the invocations available at level 1, so let's move on. Level 2, Pact of the Chain. You learn Find Familiar and cast it as an action without expending a spell slot, so that's brand new. The 2014 Pact of the Chain could cast Find Familiar as a ritual, which took them 70 minutes. A 1 action casting time means it's even potentially an option to cast Find Familiar in combat. But mainly, it means replacing a familiar that disappeared after dropping to 0 hit points, or if you want to switch the form of your familiars, it's going to be trivial now. Though I guess you still need to spend the 10 gold piece material component. When you cast it, you choose any of the normal forms, or you choose one of the special forms. So you can choose an imp, a pseudo-dragon, a quasit, a skeleton, a slad tadpole, or a sprite. Also, when you take the attack action, you can forego an attack to have the familiar attack with its reaction. I mentioned this in my overview video of Playtest 7 because I think it's a pretty big problem. Because we're supposed to be using the Playtest version of Find Familiar. That spell is in Playtest 4, Druids and Paladins, which is kind of a weird place for the Find Familiar spell, but that is where you will find it. So here it is. So the material component interaction here, it's a bit weird if we're casting as an action, because the way it's written here, I mean, we're taking a brass brazier and then we're burning all this stuff in it, and if you're casting this spell over an hour, I mean, thematically that works just fine. But if we're casting this as an action, we probably shouldn't have to do that. So maybe Pact of the Chain should be getting rid of the material component. Maybe it shouldn't be an action too. Maybe it should be a minute. But I don't think Pact of the Chain should have to expand the material component. I think that part maybe should be removed. And then you choose the familiar's appearance, like an owl, cat, or frog. Then you use the otherworldly familiar stat block. It says the familiar acts right after you, and you can use your reaction to have it attack. And this spell does not seem to interact properly with the Pact of the Chain feature. Like, what is the point of these special forms if we're just using the otherworldly familiar stat block? My assumption is the Playtest Find Familiar spell is going to be abandoned, and they neglected to add that in the design notes in this playtest, in which case we would use the stat blocks of these creatures and there will be no conflict in how we have the familiar attack. However, if that is the case, then this feature is probably overtuned and poorly balanced. I mean, the Pact of the Chain special forms were never perfectly balanced against each other. The Imp was probably the best form, and the Pseudo-Dragon was probably the worst, but at least the balance wasn't wildly out of whack. Here is the Slad Tadpole. This is terrible. It is probably worse than the base Find Familiar options. Like, I would not take this over an owl. Then, here's the Skeleton. It is medium-sized and has hands, so it can pick up things that other familiars can't, interact with things in ways other familiars can't, and can take any action other than the attack action. And you can summon it as an action as often as you like. So this needs clarification, but also needs work. Familiars probably should be tiny, first of all, and second, they should be at least roughly comparable, unless you're keeping the new Find Familiar spell, in which case we need a special form stat block so that the special forms aren't just cosmetic. Lessons of the first ones. You gain 1 feat that lacks prerequisites. In other words, first level feats that aren't fighting style feats. I don't think they're calling them first level feats anymore. They're just feats without a level restriction. Same difference. This one is the repeatable invocation, so you can take it more than once, and you very well might want to. Alert, lucky, tough, magic initiate, lightly armored, which is the one that gives you medium armor and shield. These are all available, and they're all probably worth an invocation selection. Then we have Otherworldly Leap. This allows you to cast a jump spell on yourself at will. The old version did the same thing, but it had a 9th level requirement. But the biggest change is the jump spell itself, which is pretty darn good and makes this a solid pick. I know when I playtest this Warlock, I'm taking Otherworldly Leap 100%. The new jump spell is a bonus action to cast. It lets you jump once on your turn 30 feet in any direction using only 10 feet of movement. So if you can cast this at will, I mean, obviously being able to jump 30 feet up, for an example, will occasionally be handy for, clearing a wall or reaching a ledge or whatever. But also, it's just a 20-foot speed increase on your base movement, even if you're just jumping horizontally. So your 30 feet of movement is effectively 50 feet now. So normally you can cast jump on other people, and this version has an upcast option where you can target multiple creatures with it. And of course that isn't going to matter with Otherworldly Leap. That's just the base level spell on yourself. That takes us to level 5, and the first possibility is Ascendant Step. You can cast Levitate at will. This used to have a 9th level requirement, and it removed the material component of the spell. This is a good change, in my opinion. Then we have Eldritch Smite. This requires Pact of the Blade. Once per turn, when you hit a creature with a Pact weapon, you can expend a Warlock spell slot to deal the spell slot level in D8s plus 1. And if the creature is huge or smaller, you can also knock it prone. This is identical to the Xanathar's version. The issue with this one has always been your number of Pact slots. One smite is usually half your spell casting right there. But you know what? For crit fishing, this can still be decent. You get that one super huge hit once in a while. And unlike Paladin Smites, you can do this with ranged weapons. Gaze of Two Minds allows you to use a bonus action to see through the senses of a creature you touch, applying any of their special senses until the end of your next turn. You can continue to use a bonus action on subsequent turns to maintain the connection. And if you cast a spell, you can cast it as if you were in their space as long as you're within 60 feet of each other. The 60-foot range limit is an important limitation added since the last playtest. The Player's Handbook version uses an action. It restricts the connection to other humanoids. It doesn't allow spellcasting as if in the other creature's space. And you gain the blinded and deafened condition to your own surroundings. Now, this mobile spell platform thing might be still too good, even with the 60-foot restriction. Like, at least the Scribe's Wizard's Manifest Mind has limited uses of casting as though you're in its space, and it can't open doors. You know who can open doors? A skeleton, at least if you're using the skeleton stat block. The Manifested Mind isn't invisible, but you know who can turn invisible? An imp, assuming you're using the imp stat block. We need some stuff ironed out here for sure. Then, Gift of the Depths allows you to breathe underwater, gives you a swim speed, and allows you to cast water breathing once per rest without expending a spell slot, and this is unchanged from Xanathar's. And it's niche, but, it's okay. And then Investment of the Chainmaster. This requires Pact of the Chain. You grant your familiar additional benefits. It gets a fly or swim speed of 40. You can use your bonus action to command the familiar to take the attack action. You can replace the damage type of the familiar's attack from bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing to necrotic or radiant damage. If the familiar forces a saving throw, it uses your spell save DC, and if the familiar takes damage, you can use your reaction to grant it resistance to that damage. So this is the same invocation from Tasha's with only one change. Instead of the familiar's attacks being treated as magical, you can change the damage type of their bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing attacks. And again, we need to know what's happening with Find Familiar because this doesn't interact with the playtest version at all. The otherworldly stat block isn't forcing saving throws, so you can already get it to attack with your bonus action, so it's redundant. If you're just using stat blocks of the creatures, then this is fine. I see it taken with the sprite here and there to try to take advantage of knocking creatures out with a higher DC poison arrow, but the chance to hit these creatures isn't good, and it doesn't scale. So at higher levels, this is pretty lousy. Master of Myriad Forms allows casting Alter Self at will, without expending a spell slot. This used to have an absurd 15th level requirement. And I've heard a couple people online have a lot of excitement that this is now 5th level, and I'm not sure I understand. If it is a matter of disguising yourself at will, take Mask of Many Faces. It does it for the same duration without using concentration, and it's available right from level 1. If it's the swim speed and breathing underwater that you're after, take Gift of the Depths. That gives that permanently and allows you to cast water breathing on your allies, and again, isn't using your concentration. The concentration is a big deal. And if you want Alter Self for the claws, why? If Alter Self didn't require concentration, I could see taking this invocation. Maybe Alter Self is going to be improved. But as of yet, it hasn't. And I guess the lower level requirement does make it better. And it does have some versatility. Like, you can both breathe underwater and disguise yourself. But I still wouldn't take it, personally, again, because of the concentration. One with Shadows allows you to cast invisibility on yourself at will when you're in dim light or darkness. This got a massive buff. The Player's Handbook version allows you to turn invisible when you're in dim light or darkness as an action, same thing. But you become visible if you move or take an action or a reaction. So this is way, way better. This is closer to Shroud of Shadows, which had a 15th level prerequisite and isn't in this playtest, so this is quite good. I think it basically is a combination of the two. Thirsting Blade. This gives you the extra attack feature, but with your packed weapon only, and when you reach 11th level in Warlock, you get 2 extra attacks. So the Player's Handbook version was the same without the scaling. And I said my piece with Pact of the Blade, but Thirsting Blade is part of the combination that needs to be addressed. So we're on to level 7, Whispers of the Grave. You can cast Speak with Dead at will. They've reduced the level prerequisite slightly. This used to require 9th level, and this one is really niche, but it's okay. And then level 9, Gift of the Protectors. This requires Pact of the Tome. You can have a number of creatures write their name in your Book of Shadows equal to your proficiency bonus. When any of these creatures drops to 0 hit points but isn't killed outright, they drop to 1 hit point instead, but they can't benefit again until you finish a long rest. You can erase a name from the page by touching it. This is the same as it was in Tasha's, and it's not bad. I'd consider it. Then we have Life Drinker, requires Pact of the Blade. This gives you a d6 extra necrotic, psychic, or radiant damage whenever you hit with your packed weapon, and you can expend a hit die to heal like you were spending it during a short rest. The Player's Handbook version adds your charisma modifier to damage, but it also has a 12th level requirement, and it has no healing option. This is the third invocation that combines too well with Pact of the Blade and Thirsting Blade. And then Visions of Distant Realms. You can cast Arcane Eye at will. This was 15th level, now it's 9th, so that's a significant boost, and this is a pretty good invocation. Then level 15, Witch Sight. You have True Sight to a range of 30 feet. Used to show you the true form of shape changers or creatures concealed by illusion or transmutation magic within 30 feet. So True Sight has that, plus Seeing in Darkness and the Ethereal Plane. And so it got a significant boost. And that is all the invocations. So, the Warlock overall. This is a far more safe playtest Warlock than playtest 5, which was a bold redesign. Now, if you hated the playtest 5 Warlock, this should be a relief to you. If you liked the direction they were going, you might be let down. I'm going to push the playtest 5 Warlock out of my mind and instead focus on whether I prefer this version of the Warlock over the Player's Handbook Warlock. Well, starting with packs becoming invocations, I'm on board. It adds flexibility to Warlocks, and I appreciate that. Pact of the Tome, I think is just about a bullseye. Just needs that one little bit about only getting one spell slot. Blade Pact is on the right track because it's definitely going to be fun, but there's some work on balance. And Pact of the Chain needs the most work, as currently I don't even know how it's supposed to be implemented. I do appreciate buffing some of the weaker invocations, either by reducing the prerequisite level or these little quality of life enhancements, like False Life just giving you the maximum. So, given that they've basically abandoned the Playtest 5 version, I do think there's been some good effort here in massaging the Player's Handbook Warlock into a more interesting class. So, let's look at the subclasses. We're going to start with the Archfey Patron, and I think I should start by saying the Archfey Patron is in the Player's Handbook, and I see it basically never taken. So, what have they done? Level 3 Patron spells. So just like in Playtest 5, Patron spells are just straight added to your known spells, and that's going to give the Warlock a ton of spells known. In the Player's Handbook, Patron spells were there, but they were available to select with your existing known spells, and often weren't taken at all. And there's some good spells here, though they don't all interact well with pack magic, like Plant Growth is a great spell, but there's no upcast option. Same with Phantasmal Force. They're going to be nice additions, particularly when your pack magic happens to be casting these spells at the right level. And we'll get Steps of the Fae at level 3. So this is the replacement for Fae Presence, which was just awful. Now, you can cast Misty Step for free a number of times equal to your Charisma modifier per long rest, and that is terrific. In addition, you can either add a d10 temps to a creature you can see within 10 feet after teleporting, or impose a Wisdom saving throw on creatures within 5 feet of the space you left, or have disadvantage on all their attacks against creatures other than you until the start of your next turn, which is very nice. For a class that really doesn't want to cast Misty Step with a 5th level pact slot, this is a terrific feature. Then at level 6, Misty Escape. So the old version allowed you, when you took damage, to use your reaction to teleport up to 60 feet to a space you could see and turn invisible until the start of your next turn. And you could do it once per short or long rest. Now you can cast Misty Step as the reaction and choose to either be invisible until the start of your next turn or impose a wisdom saving throw on creatures within 5 feet of the space you left, or they take 2d10 psychic damage. So the interesting thing here is you don't have the short or long rest restriction. Instead, you're limited by your number of castings of Misty Step. And that's really nice, as you could potentially use this more than once in the same fight. The reduced range does hurt a bit, but it's not catastrophic. Then at level 10, there's Beguiling Defenses. This used to make you immune to the charm condition, and if a creature attempted to charm you, you could use your reaction to attempt to charm it instead. You still gain immunity to the charm condition, but now, if you're hit by an attack roll, you can use your reaction to reduce the damage by half and force the attacker to make a wisdom saving throw or take the same amount of damage, but psychic damage. But this is only usable once per long rest unless you spend a spell slot to use it again. And it's for features like this where that first level slot that Pact of the Tome gives you is really going to shine. And level 14, Bewitching Magic. So the player's handbook at 14th level gave you Dark Delirium, and that gave you a once per short rest, one action, save or suck effect. Now, anytime you cast an enchantment or illusion spell using an action and a spell slot, you Misty Step as part of that same action without expending the additional spell slot. That's really cool. And so, in general, I think Archfey is cool. These features are all pretty good, and a Misty Step loaded Warlock is especially good for the reasons previously mentioned. The Player's Handbook Archfey Patron is one of the weakest. Now, I'd say this is upper echelon to be sure. Next up, the Celestial Patron. So this is another Warlock subclass I never see taken. I think it's better than Archfey. So this one was from Xanathar's, but it's still definitely in the lower half as far as Warlock subclasses go mechanically, and I just don't see a lot of interest in playing this one. So, let's see what they did. Level 3, Patron Spells. Same thing. Automatically prepared rather than available to select. Light and Sacred Flame are bonus spells, as they were in the Xanathar's version. Notably, we get some spells that heal, which normally are not available to Warlocks. We also have some spells that upcast, which is nice. And we get Healing Light. So this is unchanged from Xanathar's. Basically gives you a pool of dice, d6s equal to your Warlock level, plus 1, and you can expend them as a bonus action for healing to yourself or another creature within 60 feet. You can spend up to your Charisma modifier number of dice at once. And this is an okay feature. It's not a massive amount of healing, but bonus action ranged healing that doesn't interfere with your spellcasting action is pretty rare in the game. Then, level 6, we get Radiant Soul. You get resistance to radiant damage, not my first choice, and when you cast a spell that delivers radiant or fire damage, you can add your Charisma modifier to one radiant or fire damage roll of that spell against one of its targets. The problem with this feature has always been the list of radiant or fire damage spells you're likely to use do not mesh well with this feature. I mean, Sacred Flame plus this plus Agonizing Blast still doesn't compare with just doing Eldritch Blast plus Agonizing Blast. I wondered if at first there might be a play to grab like Green Flame Blade and then use Agonizing Blast for that as well as this, but it all pales in comparison to the attack action through Blade Pact Invocations. Maybe there's a Blade Singer or Eldritch Knight multiclass build in here somewhere, I'm not sure. Then level 10, Celestial Resilience, so this gives you temporary hit points equal to your Warlock level plus your Charisma modifier when you complete a short or long rest or you use Magical Cunning. Also, you can give temporary hit points to up to 5 allies equal to half your Warlock level plus your Charisma modifier. This used to be kind of a poor man's Inspiring Leader feat, but Inspiring Leader doesn't scale all that much anymore, so at higher levels, this is a lot more temps. Otherwise, this is the same as the old version, except getting them with a Magical Cunning use. And then level 14, Searing Vengeance. So this allows your Warlock, who is about to make a death saving throw, to instead leap up from prone and regain half their hit point maximum, and each creature of their choice within 30 feet takes radiant damage of 2d8 plus your Charisma modifier and is blinded until the end of your current turn. So not very long. This is usable once per long rest. And this I do not find impressive. You're never using it unless you're making death saving throws, and then you use it once to spring to your feet with half your hit points, do a small amount of damage, and deliver a condition that ends at the end of your turn. I mean, it's not awful. It's just not as dramatic as it sounds. And other classes get similar things without the once per long rest restriction, like a barbarian or a champion fighter. And in total, the Celestial Warlock, it's not bad. I mean, it's never been bad, but it's never been a top Warlock subclass, and that hasn't changed. And it's never been a popular Warlock subclass. And I kind of thought when I saw it here that they had done something to spice it up so more players would want to play it. But I don't really see many changes. And it is still okay. I don't think you're going to feel weak taking this, but I'm not sure why it's been included here, because it is not a popular subclass, and they haven't done a lot to change it. So this kind of seems like the odd addition here. Alright, Fiend Patron. So this one was in Playtest 5, and they've actually maintained some of the changes from Playtest 5, and this is also in the Player's Handbook. So level 3, we're going to get Patron spells, and it's a decent list, and probably the spells you want for this subclass. You know, Fireball and Wall of Fire and Fire Shield and Command, which upcasts amazingly, so it works well with pack magic, and they're all automatically prepared now, which is nice. Then we have Dark One's Blessing. When you drop an enemy to 0 hit points, you get temporary hit points equal to your Warlock level plus Charisma modifier. And wave to that Celestial Warlock over there that gets their temporary hit points once per short rest. This is every time an enemy is dropped at level 3. You also get the benefit if someone else reduces an enemy within 10 feet of you to 0 hit points. And that's the buff from the Player's Handbook. I should mention that the Fiend Pact is already one of the best Warlock subclasses. Then we have level 6, Dark One's Own Luck. After you roll an ability check or a saving throw, add a d10 to the roll. And yes, this does work on initiative as well. You can use the feature a number of times equal to your Charisma modifier per long rest. And this is amazing. The Player's Handbook version was good too, but it was just once per short or long rest. So it's better. And at level 10, we get Fiendish Resilience. Pick a damage type other than Force and you're resistant. Finish a short or long rest, and you can switch out the damage type to be resistant to something else if you like. This is pretty close to the Player's Handbook version, except that one said the damage from magical or silver weapons ignored the resistance, and that restriction is removed. It also didn't prevent you from picking force damage, so overall, I mean, similar value. And then level 14, Hurl Through Hell. When you hit a creature with an attack, you can impose a Charisma saving throw. If it fails, it disappears until the end of your next turn and takes 8d10 psychic damage unless it's a fiend. Once you use the feature, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest or expend a 5th level spell slot to use it again. Now get this. The Player's Handbook version did basically the same thing except no saving throw. It was maybe the premier feature of any Warlock subclass. The Playtest 5 version gave the saving throw versus the damage, and who cares? But the banishing part was still automatic. Now this provides a saving throw against the whole thing. And I gotta be honest, this is a heartbreaker for me. It's like the Zealot Barbarian's Rage Beyond Death, where they've gutted one of my favorite features. Now, maybe Hurl Through Hell was broken, I guess, but it's just hard not to be sad. But I'm gonna stop whining about Hurl Through Hell. The thing is, it probably was too powerful. So I can see why it is getting nerfed. And the thing is, they've buffed the Fiend Patron in a number of other ways, in really good ways, at much earlier levels. And the Fiend Patron has always been one of the best Warlock subclasses, and it, I think, continues to be one of the best Warlock subclasses. I'll still play one. I will have no problem playing this. Most of the time, I don't get to 14th level anyways. So I'm playing Fiend Pact Warlock because I want things like Dark One's Own Luck, and now I can use that more often and multiple times in a row, and that's going to be great. So still overall, I'm going to give this a pretty good grade. Then the great Old One Patron. So thematically, this has always been a favorite of mine, and I've played this subclass many times, even though it is considered one of the weakest mechanically. But check out this redesign. Patron spells. So this is a great list. What do we got? Detect Thoughts. Dissonant Whispers, Phantasmal Force, Tasha's, Confusion, Everard's, Telekinesis. We got good low-level spells, we got good high-level spells. Then we have Awakened Mind. So this has always been a telepathy ability, but in the player's handbook, it's really limited. You can speak telepathically to someone within 30 feet, no action, and that's it. You don't need to share a language for it to understand you, but here's the thing, it was one-way communication, so you could send messages, but you couldn't receive them in return. Now you use this as a bonus action, so that's new, to set up telepathy with a creature within 30 feet. Now it can move beyond that range to a number of miles equal to your charisma modifier for a number of minutes equal to your warlock level, or if you use the feature again. So you must now share a language, but you can receive messages as well as send them. Probably overall a slight buff. Then we move on to psychic spells. So this is just brand new. It replaces nothing. When you cast a warlock spell that deals damage, it can be psychic damage. And if you cast an enchantment or illusion spell, you can do so without verbal or somatic components. That is fantastic. So, free subtle spell for all enchantments or illusions, and your patron spells list is packed with them, and flexible damage on all your damage spells. I mean, you could play with some really unique stuff with this, like you could take Poison Spray, and then you take Agonizing Blast, Poison Spray, Eldritch Spear, Poison Spray, then have it deliver psychic damage. Not necessarily recommending that, but it would be unique and not necessarily terrible. Mainly, though, the free subtle spell casting is terrific. And this is all extras. This does not replace anything. It is just added benefits right from level 3. We move on to level 6 and we get Clairvoyant Combatant. So this replaces the lackluster Entropic Ward that would impose disadvantage on one attack per short or long rest using your reaction. And if the attack roll missed, you had advantage on your next attack against them before the start of your next turn. Wasn't good. Now, when you use your Awakened Mind to set up a telepathic bond, you can force the creature to make a Wisdom saving throw, or it has disadvantage on all attacks against you for the duration of the bond. You can use this once per short or long rest, and you can use it again by expending a spell slot of 2nd level or higher. This is definitely better, though there's a level where you have to expand 5th level slots to use this again, unless you happen to be multiclassed. And then level 10, Thought Shield. You can't have your thoughts read unless you allow it, and you gain resistance to psychic damage, and if you take psychic damage, you inflict the same amount to the creature that inflicted it on you. And this is the same as the Great Old One's 10th level feature, and it's okay. However, again, we're going to get another feature that is just a bonus feature. It doesn't replace anything. In this case, it's Eldritch Hex. You always have the Hex spell prepared. I mean, big deal. When you cast Hex and choose an ability, the target has disadvantage on that saving throw, as well as ability checks. I mean, maybe that's what upcasting Hex should have done in the first place, but I will take it. This is something you definitely want to combine with other spellcasters in your party. I would think Wisdom saves is the obvious pick. There's so many spells that applies to, and it also sets up your Clairvoyant Combatant. Then level 14, Create Thrall. So the player's handbook version allowed you to charm an incapacitated humanoid until you use the feature again. I mean, potentially powerful, but usually useless. Now you get the Summon Aberration spell, and you can cast it normally if you like. Or you can cast it so it doesn't use concentration. If you do so, it only lasts a minute, but it also gets temporary hit points equal to your warlock level plus your charisma modifier, and if it hits a creature under the effect of your hex spell, the first time it hits on a turn, it deals an additional d6 psychic damage. So this is really good. Concentration-free summoning is good. Who would have figured? And Great Old One looks amazing now. Can't wait to try this out. So when it comes to the Warlock overall, I mean, this one does look a lot more like the player's handbook version than Playtest 5 did, no question about that, but there are still some bold changes here. The biggest bold change on the base Warlock, of course, is what they did with the pacts and making them invocations and then kind of boosting them up as well. And I think that's actually a masterstroke. Really good. Obviously, some rebalancing needed for Pact of the Blade. Pact of the Chain needs clarifications on how it works. But as a starting point, I think that's a good change. The other thing I really appreciate is we've got two subclasses here I think they just did a bang up job with, and that is the Archfey and the Great Old One, which are now kind of boosted up to that level where, the Fiend Patron already was. And so we have these subclasses that are pretty well balanced against each other. The odd one out, I think, is Celestial. If you're going to include Celestial, it needed to be spiced up and, just made something more attractive for players to play, because players don't gravitate to it now, and I don't see how this would change that at all, so why include it? If you're going to include it, then it needs to be spiced up, or pick a different subclass to feature in the player's handbook. But 3 out of 4 ain't bad. So there's some good stuff here, despite the fact this is not as adventurous as the Playtest 5 version of the Warlock was. But this playtest version of the Warlock does make me concerned about one thing, and that's a problem I have with the current Warlock that this Warlock doesn't address, and that is that I usually see Warlock taken as a 1 or 2 level dip. So I very seldom see people just go straight Warlock. And there's good reason. Mechanically, there's a lot of reason to just grab 2 levels. You get your Agonizing Blast and Repelling Blast, and then go do Sorcerer or Paladin or something else. And this version doesn't address that. And I'm a little concerned that we're going to end up with a player's handbook in 2024 where that's still not addressed. Now, Pact of the Blade, I guess, and the related invocations give you some reason to go straight Warlock, but I don't see those surviving the playtest as is. So I don't expect that incentive to survive. What really needs to happen is Eldritch Blast needs to scale somehow with Warlock level. They did that in Playtest 5, and they've reverted it here. And I'm hoping that survey results will convince them to once again have Eldritch Blast connected to Warlock level. I just think if you do that, then you have a good reason to continue with Warlock. So we'll see if that happens or not, but that is the Warlock. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon. If you enjoy these videos, don't thank me. Thank my patrons who allow me to do them. And today I want to thank my mage-level patrons. Hey, Mr. Wonderful, Babrak, Blue Wolf, Blue Eyes White 7, Condor, John D, Descarpus 9, El Conquistadorito, Falcon Neal, Jared Huberger, John Wayne, Joseph Hall, Joseph Robideau, Joseph Rogers, Wu Carl Kong, Lila Corpsegrave, Maddie, Michael Michelle, Moxie, Nemo, Paul Suzak, Prometheo NTG, Purge Thunder, Reichenstall, Ryan Wilmot, Samwise, Shane and Todd Beyond, Starfall, Earshine, The Noam Chomsky, Third, Valentin, and Wade. Thanks so much for supporting me. If any of you would like to support this channel, you can do so through Patreon, and the link is in the video description. Otherwise, I'll talk to y'all on Monday.